you get two articles, they contradict each other. Some of it's from records, but a lot of it's oral history. My family lived the history, the Strattons up in the Highlands, and that's, I almost put more weight on the oral history than I do some of the articles anyway. So, you know, the Highlands is located south of Butte. We all look up at the white snow-capped mountains, and you know, here's Butte up here. Here's Highlands, Highland City. It's probably about a 10-hour talk to really give the Highlands justice. So we're going to try to cram this in 60 minutes here. So hopefully I don't go over. But this is a picture here, looking up at the Highlands. We look at that every day. And here's a picture sitting on top of Red Mountain, looking back at Butte. And there's Butte back in here. This is right where the original lookout tower they put, and my family helped the Forest Service. They brought in mules and brought it up there, and it didn't even last the first season. It was blown off the mountain by lightning. And if you go up there on the top, there's still chunks of glass and stuff left, but it was disintegrated. I think there's actually a couple concrete footings, maybe, with a couple remnants of it. So here's just a few features of the Highlands. You know, you're familiar with Moose Creek, the Highland mine here. So the Forest Service maps show Highland City down here by the mine. I had shoulder surgery, so my hands are pretty shaky. But that's where it shows Highland City. Actually, Highland City is actually up here in the Fish Creek drainage. You've probably heard of Lime Kiln. This is the toll road. This is where the Stratton Mill was over in the Fish Creek. And we're going to get back to this toll road. This was the main road that you took into the Highlands until a later time. There was another toll road that came up over Nevin Hill here. But you had to pay a toll if you wanted to bring your goods and freight and stuff into Highland City. So, you know, and I've searched a lot of maps, and I apologize if these are real grainy. I know you probably can't even see them. And I need to go back and search again because they're always updating with higher resolution maps. But what's interesting about this is, you know, so here's Butte City, and let me get oriented here. I'm looking for, so there's Red Mountain City right there. Notice it's at the end of the road. The road went right to Red Mountain City, and that was it. You turned around and went back. This is another early map from the 1800s, and it's a little hard to see here. Here's Butte City, Rocket, but notice, sorry, my hand's shaky. Those of you that are familiar with reading maps, the larger your city, the bigger the bold the print. So just looking at this, you know, you look at Deer Lodge, that was a big city back then. Here's Raidersburg, and I don't know how many have gone between Three Forks and going up Canyon Ferry and gone over, checked out Raidersburg. There's a little bit there. But here's something that's kind of fascinating is instead of calling it Rocker, it was called Rocket. And, you know, I think of Rocket like in the 1960s, but obviously the Chinese had rockets, you know, thousands of years ago. So there's kind of a blow up. But yeah, it's called Rocket. So, just something interesting, I thought. Here's another blow up of the map. You know, here's Red Mountain City, here's Butte City. Just kind of interesting. Your Rochester, Darling, Oliver, Iron Rod. Just kind of fascinating. And this one's also pretty grainy. This is an old one, and I think I have it on a zoom here. Again, Red Mountain City, end of the road, right up there in the Highlands, up at Table Mountain. So I've done a lot of work trying to find pictures of the Highlands, and the problem is, of Highland City, the problem is not a lot of cameras were around in the early 1860s. There were more expeditions. This is just another view of the Highlands. There's the toll road. You guys are probably familiar with the old highway to Whitehall, the old rock shop. Rock shop sat somewhere around in here, but the old, they call it Toll Mountain. Well, that's where it got its name, was the toll road that you had to pay the toll to get to Highland City. And so there's Highland City, Red Mountain City, Stratton Mill, Pigeon Creek campgrounds down here. Here's the lookout tower. But this is the only picture that I know of Highland City. My dad said this was my grandfather Bluff. It was a hunting party. It's too bad because everything's washed out in the back. You can't orient it with any mountains. So I had to just go on his word. But this was my grandfather Bluff. And it's kind of an interesting photo. You know, this is from the 1860s. You can study it, you know, the chains hanging, expanded steel, lantern. You know, you look, they got pocket watches, we got poodles. And he said this was a hunting party. But it's one of those pictures you can just get lost studying. You know, it's, at least I do. So this, I believe, was about the 1930s or 40s. This was Johnny Kern's cabin, and I'll talk a little more about Johnny Kern. And these are some more current pictures. I probably have a couple family members here that can correct me up, but I believe this one was the blacksmith shop. I believe that one was a blacksmith shop, and that was a brewery, but I could have them backwards. So, but I got to tell you a quick little story about that blacksmith shop. So before my time, in the 1950s, a family came up to where my family lived in Fish Creek, and they wanted to know where the blacksmith shop was in Highland City. And my dad, real good gentleman, he gave me specific instructions how to get there. Well, it kind of got the best of my dad. I don't remember if it was later that day or the next day. He had to go up and see why did they want to know right where the blacksmith shop was. Well, when he got up there, the anvil was still there. And the anvil had been moved, and underneath the anvil was a square hole. And that just drove my dad crazy right to his grave. What was in that square hole? You know, it was, you know. So just, this is the cemetery, you know, and there's a few of the characters, Shotgun Liz. We grew up in the late 60s, John Weymouth, he had one leg. We called him Peg Leg Weymouth. He actually had two wooden legs. He had a good leg, his go-to-town leg, and then he had his work leg that he cut tobacco cans and he overlapped them, and it was like an armadillo shell. And that was what he went and worked in his mine with. And he pushed his ore cart in and out with his one wooden leg that was armored. So, but he's there. So a lot of these graves, there's actually graves outside this fence. I believe a boy did his Eagle Scout badge around 2000, and he put up a new fence because the old fence had rotted. And the original picket fence, my dad said there was a family, I believe it was the Negleys, were up there mining, and they lived in a cabin just a little ways from here. And it drove her crazy at night, that picket fence around it. I guess she got up one day and tore the picket fence down and threw it in a hole. So that's excuse me. So Highland City it was a full-blown city. It had dance halls and meat markets, and I'll go into that list. But this is actually in Last Chance Gulch in Helena. This was the Highland City Meat Market. I'm putting this sometime in the 1870s, but it's kind of interesting, you know, the meat hanging here, and kind of a signature is that they had their trees they put out in front. And to the best of my research, this was ran by Con Coors with the Grant Coors Ranch. Con Coors was a rancher back before the turn of the century, and, well, I guess long after that. But he had this meat market, and then this is the meat market in Deer Lodge, and that's also the Highland City Meat Market. And again, they got their signature trees out in front. So, it was kind of interesting that I've got two pictures of the Highland City Meat Markets, and neither one are from Highland City. So gold was first discovered in the Highlands on the Fish Creek drainage, also known as Highland Gulch, on June 25th, 1866 by Thomas Rudder. He had partners Thomas Hall, Frank Beck, E.B., J.S. Coleman, Dr. Parker, William Crawford, and J.B. Dunlop. Within 2 months, there was 200 people. It was a boom town. It was what a real true boom town was. The town grew overnight. Accounts state that it reached a population of over 5,000 people within a couple of years. Some accounts list 10,000 people. Half the residents were living in tents and makeshift shafts. Although Butte's first mineral discoveries were in 1864, Highland City was a much larger city through the 1860s. One account lists over half the population were Chinese descent. Being friends with the Chinese, the miners, my granddad would ask how they were doing, and he usually got the same response, was someday 1 penny, someday 2 penny. So, in the summer of 1867, Red Mountain City was recognized as the largest settlement in southern Deer Lodge County, which at that time included Silverbow County. And I believe it reached all the way up almost to the Canadian border. Somebody might correct me up on that, but I believe it went clean up. So it was a pretty big area to be the largest at the time. Highland City became a full-blown city with all the amenities. One account lists 300 houses, 10 saloons, 5 dance halls, barber shops, a post office, a Masonic lodge, 3 hotels, restaurants, blacksmith shops, several butcher shops, and hurdy-gurdy houses, a brewery, and not a single church. The city had a water piping system with bored-out logs, with a boring machine fabricated in Highland City by the blacksmith Charlie Windrich. With the winter snows over chest deep in an average winter, it's hard to imagine a city of this size so long ago. One account lists 4th of July, 1867, 4 feet of snow. There was no government assistance in those days. You had to make your money during the good weather to get you through the bad weather. So, at the Mining Museum, there used to be a section of the wooden pipe, and we're looking for it. It used to be in the hoist room. I don't know how many remember that, but my Uncle John Stratton, my dad donated. There used to be a sign on it, so we're going to find that. But it was part of the Highland City water system. And there's some newspaper articles said they had fire hydrants, which in San Francisco they did. They had wooden pipe systems for fighting fires. But I believe most of the water system in Highland City was to do the hydraulic mining, where they were bringing in the water from the different drainages to get enough pressure. And they used what they call gold giants or gold monitors. They were water cannons. So, but you may never know the true answer. The first county election had over 1,000 miners voting and attended a grand ball in Highland City. So, I guess we're okay on time. I got to read you this article. So, I'm going to put this picture up. So, the people of Highland City did nothing by halves. According to all available accounts of the colorful, lively mining camp, they mined and gave balls and parties on a grand scale. A dance running 2 days and nights was not an unusual occurrence. On one occasion, invitations were sent out for a grand ball. Rod Leggett was head of the committee in large. A heavy snow fell a day or two before and blocked the roads. The trip to Highland City in those days of horse and rigs, or in a span of horses and a spring wagon, was odorous enough over the mountain roadways without having snowdrifts to buck. But the Highlanders were determined to have their dance and to have guests from Butte, Deer Lodge, the Valley, as the Highland City residents called their neighboring communities. Mr. Leggett sent word by horseback messenger to Butte and Deer Lodge that the dance would be held as scheduled. He then hired 200 men, equipped them with shovels, and the workmen shoveled the trail for 6 miles. The dancers came to that ball, which was given in the winter of 1867, years before Butte became a city, and the Highland City Hall reverberated with the gayest party of the season. The old Highlanders were a right royal people and served their guests in royal manner, read the account of the festivities. So this, and again, this is washed out. You can't see it, but this was the drift. This is a postcard our family have, and that's a guy standing in a wagon, but this was the drift on Limekiln Hill. So this was close to a picture of Highland City, but that was a hand shovel drift. So kind of fascinating. Those of us that have shoveled snow know how much work that can be. So I always wondered what it was. Maybe, you know, we picked this day, Valentine's Day. It's kind of a romantic day, right? And to me, the whole living in the Highlands is kind of romantic. I don't know why that sits with me, but there is a love story in this too. We'll get to that. But I always wondered what it was like to live up there. What did they freight in a piano? You know, what was the music? What was playing in the dance halls? This is 120, 30 years ago. But they had hurdy-gurdies, and these are actually at the folk festival. I was able to listen to some of these hurdy-gurdies they had, but kind of like an organ grinder, maybe kind of a real unique sound they had. And obviously these were easier to bring in than a piano. But anyway, I just kind of fascinating to think what they had dance halls. What was their music? How were they? Would have been a neat time to be alive. So Rod Leggett, along with his brothers John and Alexander, bought a steamboat in St. Louis. They named it the Gallatin. They loaded it with provisions and went up the Missouri to Fort Benton. They sold it and freighted their goods with bull teams to Highland City. Rod Leggett set up a general store, and it was referred to as the finest in the Montana Territory. 1870 census listed Leggett as the richest merchant in Highland City. Provisions were very high in 1866 in Highland City. According to a bill found by my granddad, Fred Stratton, the bill listed beans at $1.25 a pound, coffee $1.25 a pound, flour $1, beef 25 cents a pound, a bar of soap $3, nails, kind of spendy for soap. Nails $1, sugar $1.25, and bacon $1. So those of you that have to go to the grocery store, those are comparable to our prices, and some even more expensive. So that was a long time ago. So obviously Leggett probably was the richest guy in Silver County. So he patented most of the gulch, doing what they call hydraulic mining, and that's what I was talking about. They would bring pipes from any drainage they could, and they'd get them into one central pipe. And then this is what they call, in this country we call them gold giants. California, they refer to them as gold monitors. But they're basically water cannons. Before we had bulldozers, they did a lot of destructive mining, but that's how they did it. They would wash the gravels, the alluvials, and then they would, gold is your heaviest, and it would work its way to the bottom, and it's a big placer mining. It was pretty, they moved a lot of ground. A lot of this country's been disturbed with hydraulic mining. So, some accounts list as little as $1 million worth of gold was removed from Highland Gulch by the turn of the century. Others list as much as 10 to 15 million. No one will ever know for sure. Reporting your take was the best way to get yourself shot. With gold averaging between $20 and $30 an ounce, that translates to a lot of free gold. The gold was rich and abundant in the early days of Highland City. One story stated the ground was so rich that men were diving below 32-degree water in the shafts to recover the gold. Another story was a bet that they could cover 100 ounces of gold with the toss of their felt hat in the sluice boxes, covering 100 ounces of gold. So an ounce of gold is about a teaspoon, just to give you, and I haven't looked at gold prices right lately, 1,200 to 1,500 we're bouncing around, so. But, excuse me?
1368.
All right. I should know that, right? So, when they plastered, they used windlass cranks to raise the material up in their shafts. They had sluice boxes, they had rocker boxes. Most people think of the gruff old men in the felt hats, but there were a few women that also worked side by side running the rocker boxes. And I kind of always felt like they got written out of history. You think of the old miner, you only think of the guy, the gruff old guy, but there was women in the working diggings too. So numerous ditches can be found throughout the Highland District. They stacked rock walls to hold back the banks to get down to the pavement. So your gold layer lays on bedrock, and depending on where you're at, it's 2 feet or 6 feet or 10 feet. But that's, Mother Nature's a big gold miner. As things are washing and moving, your gold's your heaviest material and it's working down. Well, it hits that bedrock, and that's where most of that gold lies. So everything's sloughing. You got water and gravels and everything. So this was all done with levers and by hand, these rock walls, and they were trying to get deep down to the channel to get where the bedrock was. And that's so that a lot of handwork, and it's fascinating wandering through actually a lot of the mining districts throughout Montana, but I kind of get lost. Trying to piece it all together, how they conveyed their water and got down to gold. So numerous ditches can be found throughout the Highland District. They stack rock walls to hold back the banks to get down to pay layer. Many of these rock walls still exist. Walking around the diggings, I can almost hear the picks and shovels clanging on the rocks. It must have been something else to be part of. I always thought it must have been a romantic time with a few exceptions. This would have been before the invention of toilet paper and the Sears and Roebuck catalog. My granddad, Fred Stratton, he had a unique method for mining. They would drift. So most people think of drifts and it's lode mining or hard rock mining, but they were actually drifting up under Highland City and then plastering down the floor of their tunnels. And it was kind of and then when they moved over to Spring Gulch, they were actually able to mine during this time of year because they were underground placer mining. People just figured things out. So there was some limited hard rock mining in the Highland District in the early days. The Highlands had a unique method of sinking drifts due to the lawlessness. Almost all the drifts went in a short ways, and then they made a bend. And including one of the tunnels my great-granddad Bluff sunk, which is still open today. The reasoning for the bend of the tunnel, a lot of people think they're chasing the vein, but it was so they didn't get shot in the back. And it's pretty unique to the Highlands. All the tunnels went in and made a bend, because it's pretty easy to jump somebody's claims, just shoot down the tunnel and you get them, but they all went and made a bend. So it was kind of a unique part of the Highlands, the lawlessness. You don't want to get shot in the back yet. So there were arastas built and a 24 stamp mill that constructed on the Ballarat Hill. A couple of arastas are still visible. There's a rock bridge. That still exists. You know, it's 140 years old or more. This is some of the creek. It's really neat because it's all mossed in and what do they call it? Natural attenuation, Mother Nature healing herself. It's blended. It's really neat. This is an arasta, and what they did with an arasta is they usually take a real solid piece of rock like granite, and it would be on a chain or something, and they'd have some way of powering it, horses or whatever, and they would drag that around, and they'd throw mercury or quicksilver in there, and that would crush the ore and smear that ore, and then the mercury would collect up the gold. It would coagulate together. Then they would take it to they put it in their leather chamois and bare hands. They twist it out and squeeze out the mercury, and then they'd have this blob of fine gold and mercury together. And then they'd take it in their cabin or wherever. Maybe some of them did it outside, and they'd cook it on the stove or in the retort, and they'd burn off the mercury. Well, you've all heard of the crazy old coot in the cabin. They get mercury poison. They didn't know that. Plus handling with their bare hands. Same with the old Mad Hatters, the felt hats. They shaped them with mercury, and they always said the crazy Mad Hatters. So this is another picture of Rasta. So the main road to Highland City was over Parsons Trail on the toll road, also known as the Mail Trail. The toll road is still intact, and it's hidden from sight, and is separated from Highland City. The Mail Trail, winter mails was sometimes snowshoes, and they were charging as much as $2.50 a letter in 1860s. So, when you complain about putting that stamp, right? So, this is an article that it's pretty fascinating. I got to take the time to read it. We're doing okay on time, so. This is, again, this was the toll road that was built, and they charged you to go over it. So there's only one way in and out of Highland City, and you got Leggett sitting there charging an arm and leg for provisions, and so obviously people are going to be taking their gold to go over to Raidersburg or Melrose or Deer Lodge to get to Virginia City or Bannock to get provisions. Well, it didn't take somebody, a rocket scientist, to figure out they're going to have their gold traveling over the toll road. So I'm going to read you this article. I think it's kind of neat. So, Coyote Bill was a brave and hardy to prospect along the Bloody Bone Ridge. Coyote Bill, buried in Virginia City, his grave marked by a marble slab erected by grateful prospectors who struck a rich lead of gold as a result of Bill's death, was a brave man. For Coyote Bill prospected the Bloody Bone Ridge in the days when that section of the Highland Trail, which led from Alder Gulch to Silver Bow, was a plagued spot for gold rush prospectors. Camps such as Bannock, Virginia City, Highland City, Silver Bow, and Last Chance were high, wide, and handsome when incidents occurred which resulted in the naming of Bloody Bone Ridge. Virginia City and Last Chance were supply depots for the gold camps. Mule and oxen pack trains were the methods of transportation and freighting in the mountainous country. Some trails were passable only to pack animals. Men either walked from the camp to camp or rode horseback on natural trails. The Highland Trail was one. It was used by gold seekers moving between Alder Gulch, Silver Bow. Sometimes these travelers were richly laden with nuggets. They were targets for the road agents, and at one point, where the trail zigzagged through a treacherous pass surrounded by a dense growth of fir trees, many miners were held up, robbed, and murdered. The trail claimed many victims, some of them from the old Highland City, traveling either to or from Alder Gulch. The immediate area was dubbed the Highlanders' Bone Ridge Trail because of the human bones rotting in the tracks. Kind of interesting. As such, the trail was avoided, nearly forgotten until the prospector known only as Coyote Bill. The Bone Ridge section had never been prospected. The miners feared it. And Coyote Bill, and my article's kind of scrubbed out here. Tom rode from Highland City to Moose Creek to inquire about him. So he was lost up there somewhere on Bone Ridge. He was given up as being lost, dead, or perhaps murdered. Winter brought an end to the search. The next spring, Coyote Bill's body was found by a party including James Parker and James Trudeau, who camped on the old Highland Trail in its upper fork, so called because it was the point at which a detour around Bone Ridge left the main trail. Coyote Bill's body was found in a sitting position braced against a tree. While working to dig a grave, Parker and Trudeau and others in the party struck a rich gold leaf, which is ascribed only in the records as the Bone Ridge Claim. In gratitude to Coyote Bill, they took his remains to Virginia City and purchased the marble slab which marks his grave. Highland Trail is now a Forest Service trail used by hunters, wood haulers, and some prospectors still seeking to strike it rich. But today's traveler in that beautiful, rugged country walks along Bloody Bone Ridge in peace. The highwaymen are gone, and so are the vigilantes who put a firm, quick stop to the murderous careers. Anyway, I think that's kind of neat. We complain about traveling our Montana roads in the winter. At least we didn't have to travel to Bloody Bone Ridge, right? So it was a lawless time, and people living during that time were happy to see the vigilantes. Montana was an untamed land in the mid-1800s. There was an account of a cattle rustler stealing cattle in Melrose and tried to sell the stolen cattle to one of the Highland City butcher shops. The local residents rustled him up, asked him what would he do if they let him go free. The reply was the rustler was give me a rope and I'll show you. So the locals decided to take a rope and they showed him a tree on the edge of town, over in Wood Gulch. So, there was also the horse thieves. And so, you guys are looking up at the Highlands, you know, here's Red Mountain, there's Piece of Table Mountain. Highland City would be off to the right. And this is coming down, if you've ever been up the Fish Creek Road, just down the roll of this is a Pigeon Creek campground. But this little pasture up here is called Sperry's Pasture. And that's where the horse thieves were stealing, they'd steal the horses, and they would rebrand them, and then they'd put them up in Sperry's Pasture to let the brands heal over. And it's just kind of a neat part of the Highland history. There's Sperry's Pasture. But this is a high mountain pasture. This is probably 8,000 feet. And kind of, there's a zoom in of it. And I've been up there looking for that big bull elk that I never could find. But kind of, I should be hunting, but then I kind of get lost figuring there must be something, remnants or remains of something I never could find. Kind of interesting. So, after sifting through the floor of one of the saloons in the 1950s, my father, Howard Stratton, he found a small amount of flour gold and over 3 dozen balls from the ball and cap pistols. Just give you a color of the saloons up there. They were, you know, before they had cartridges, they used ball and cap pistols. It must have been a wild time. No law enforcement. A couple notable stories. The Highland District was the Cooley Brothers. They worked the Cooley Channel. And they were very untrusting, and they had hired hands. And so they always, one of the two brothers would always stay on the claim and work with the hired hands, while the other brother went to Helena, to the houses of ill repute or whatever, and then he'd come back after a week, and then the other brother would go up. So that was the Cooley Brothers. The other was John Hyneman, and John Hyneman, he hit a telluride vein up there, a very high grade ore, and he shipped, I think it was 6 wagon loads of telluride, and he did really good off of it. Very high grade ore. But instead of doing the old get the bottle of whiskey and celebrate, he went and got a berry pie, got food poisoning, and died. So by 1874, almost everyone had left the Highland District, with the exception of a few miners and scattered families around. The last baby born in Highland City was being delivered to a woman that was being packed out of her cabin while it was burning. There were fires on both ends of town. Much of the timber was in the area of the Highland and Red Mountain City was harvested for cabins, drifts, and firewood. As neighbors left, cabins were torn down for firewood rather than travel up the hillsides for firewood. Between the fires and the dismantling, there's only a few buildings left. And I think it's really sad, but that's how the history played out. So there really isn't much for cabins. There's old depressions, but those of you familiar with Butte history, you know, the East Ridge and the whole Basin Creek area and Homestead, those were all stripped for the heap leaching for the timber. And that's the same thing they did there. So why would you go up the mountain to get your firewood when there's nice seasoned wood right there? So it just kind of sad how it played out. That's what happened. So keep in mind, 10 years after Highland City was established, in 1866, that was the Great Sioux War, or better known as Custer's Last Stand. So this was 10 years before. And then there was the Battle of the Bighorn in 1877, or the Nez Perce War, also known as the Battle of the Big Hole. So there's a story that's been passed down. The cavalry was trying to make a shortcut through the Highlands, and they went up. They went up, would be here, trying to cut with their howitzer. And I believe the cavalry only had maybe 1 or 2 howitzers. That was their cannons. And what I was told was they had to abandon it up in Pigeon Creek. And I'm pretty sure that was recovered, because I can't imagine them just leaving it. But again, when you're up there looking for that elusive elk, you have to wonder if you're going to come around a tree and find it. So, but my friends that are really into the history, you know, there was only 1 or 2 howitzers in those days, so I'm pretty sure it was recovered. Still something to think about, right? So this picture was sent to me a few years back. Well, it's out of order. So this is just talking about the, you know, this was the Battle of the Big Hole. Some of the maps, where we at there, Butte, Virginia City. This was at the same time. I think this was the Battle of the Big Hole. Just kind of give you a little taste. This was 10 years after Highland City. So this was found up on Table Mountain. Kind of interesting. It was a tool, and you know, was it 100 years old or thousands of years old? But obviously, it's a tool. It was sitting up there on one of the talus slopes on the Slide Rock. The picture was sent to me. I'm pretty fascinated with it. It's just a little piece of the Highlands. So since this is Valentine's Day, there's a love story here. So we gotta. So in 1908, Johnny Kern unearthed a 60-ounce nugget in the Highlands. It's one of the largest nuggets ever recorded in Montana. My dad said the nugget was used to promote Alaskan gold mines, because nobody knows where it went. That's what, again, we're back to oral history. My dad said that was used to promote Alaska gold mines, that there was never a shovel put in the ground. But Johnny Kern died in the Highlands during the winter of 1923 and had to be buried in Butte, instead of next to the woman he wanted to marry, Lulu. She was a Russian dancing girl who was better known as Shotgun Liz. Her real name was Lubrigiga Konstanovich. That was my best Russian. She was the law and order of Highland City. There is one account of her shooting a man that wanted his way with her. He was buried in Highland City in 1867. His headboard read, "Killed on the 4th of July, 1867, for getting too fresh." So my granddad stated Shotgun Liz has actually put quite a few men in the ground. And I could devote a full talk to Johnny Kern and Shotgun Liz, but I kind of had to chop things out here. So my great-granddad, Tom Bluff, first moved to the Highland Mountains in the 1870s, and Fred Stratton moved there in 1891. Fred Stratton, my granddad, married Tom Bluff's daughter Maud, and they started a family of their own in the Highlands. Bill Stratton was the first boy born in Highland District in 42 years, and it was big news of the day. There were five Stratton brothers: Bill, Charlie, John, and Howard. The fifth brother, Freddie, passed away at the age of 16 due to a fever. Fred Stratton kept the family fed with gold he mined in the small placer diggings. Here's a picture of my father, Howard Stratton. Oops. Let me skip ahead there. That was their dump truck. That was kind of, this is working, there's ice and snow there. That you can see the snow hanger, the ice hanging off. They had to work all winter. There's snow in the trees. So they would placer in the drifts during the winter months, and they could still run their operation, which was actually pretty unique. So this is the Stratton Brothers. There's my grandpa, Fred, Maud, my dad, my Uncle John, my Uncle Charlie, my Uncle Bill. And there they are again. That's with a hoist, and I believe they had a little donkey steam engine that ran this. As a matter of fact, that's probably the steam engine right there. There they are sitting out in front of the homestead cabin. So this is a picture of here's a picture of my father, Howard Stratton, and his, oh, that was the early dump truck, sorry. There's many articles written about my family's unique life living in the Highland Mountains. Their primary transportation was horse, wagons, and my grandma's sled. This picture of my dad and my grandpa talking about a young boy working in the mines at a young age. This was just one of the articles. My family never really knew the Depression existed because they kind of lived in a depression the whole time up there in the mountains. It wasn't big news, you know. Again, their primary transportation was horses, wagons, and grandma's sleds. That's putting up the Timothy hay to make it through the winters with the animals, the wagons. It's my grandma Maud, it's my dad, Uncle John. You notice that's a sled, not a wagon. There's skids on that. This was her wagon, Grandma Maud's wagon, when they'd come to Butte. And she had a little wood stove in there, and they'd make their, I think they only made it to town maybe once or twice in the winter. But I do know when my granddad, he was a very big man, his hands were 6 inches across the palm. When he was in town, for extra money while they were getting groceries, he'd dig 3 or 4 county graves. And for those of you that ever dug a hole, to dig one grave might be a 2-day job, and he'd dig 3 or 4 in town while they were for extra money. Maud was also a seamstress. She would make dresses for women all over southwest Montana. And I have her logbook with the dress sizes for her customers. It's pretty neat. It's a little book and it's got all these sizes. I can't believe they're real sizes though. They just don't. I mean, I've heard of hourglass figures, but these are crazy. So, but her primary struggle next to feeding and clothing the boys was to get them a proper education. She had some struggles getting the county to provide a school teacher with only 2 school-age boys. The closest school was Twin Bridges. She appealed to the trustees of the District 11, appealed to the county superintendent, and finally the State Board of Education. They said if she had 3 boys, they would provide her a teacher. She offered an orphan, a home, schooling, and to live in the Highland Mountains, and in the end, her boys were educated enough through the 8th grade. And so, this is a picture. So, those of you who probably grew up with weekly readers, you know, I'm a 1964 model, so we have weekly readers, but there was a standard publication that went around through the 30s and 40s, and it was called the Literary Digest. And it went to all schools throughout the country. And so this was a big article about this really strange one-room schoolhouse way out here in the primitive Montana, and it was the Highland School up there. So there's my dad, my Uncle John, and the McLean boy. That was a school teacher. And Montana's youngest school marm, the state's smallest school, Mrs. Stocker. So there's a little better picture. And what's neat about this picture, so you guys are familiar with eBay. I don't know what intrigued me to do it, but I clicked on Stratton's or Highlands or something, and this picture came up. I'm like, that's the picture I've been looking for, because my dad used to show me that picture. Long story short, I ended up buying the original prints that the reporter came out from Chicago in 1932 and took these pictures in March, and you know, there's 3 feet of snow, and he went up there and he took these 2 pictures, and on the back of the pictures, and they're yellow, and it's got the handwritten, so I got the original pictures from 1932, but that had to be a fake, right? And there's a picture of them. But this is so one point here is that, you know, different articles we have, but one of the complaints by the school marm was she wished the boys would pay as much attention to their schoolwork as they did to the rats playing with their whiskers in the rafters. So they used to ski down to the schoolhouse, and their first job was to you know, build the fires and get the ink wells thawed out and get the school rolling. But as she doing classes, they sit there and pay more attention to the. So we're down to about 10-15 minutes here, but this is that literacy digest, and I'm going to leave a couple copies here at the archive. It's a pretty neat read. It's basically it's a mother's plight to educate her boys. And so my granddad, he had horses to rent out to miners. He had gold that had to come out of the ground, and that's what had to happen. And my grandmother, she had boys that needed an education, and so there was almost a little parting of the ways, and this article covers that. And this was in the Literacy Digest. It was a standard circulation. What does it say up there? 1932, March 25th, 1932. So anyway, I'll leave a couple copies. If I had more time, I'd read it to you because it is kind of a fascinating article. This is what it looks like. Actually, it doesn't. This wall has now collapsed, so there's just this wall left. But it's kind of neat. So the school teacher lived at the Stratton home. And again, she complained about the rats in the rafters. So living in the mountains, working the mining claims, raising family brought challenges to families that people don't necessarily think about. And that's that article. You know, you wouldn't think about how to get. Nowadays, your kids go off to school, but there's a mom that really wanted to educate her sons. I just think that's pretty neat. Her fight to educate. So. This is just, I don't know which one of the boys that is. Might be my dad. And here's some of the articles, you know, talking about makes the best mark for punctuality. I probably have a couple teachers that might have disagreed with me over the years. Highland School, smallest in Northwest, no more. Last 2 pupils, big news, you know, they graduated. Highland School becomes ghost, no students left. So, my granddad, Fred Stratton, found this nugget weighing approximately 1 troy ounce, again about a teaspoon size. But it really closely resembles the Italian statue Venus de Milo. And that's what, right there. And so my dad always said that this is the copy, because this is millions or billions of years old. This one's only a few thousand years old. So, but it was real popular back in the 30s. 40s in Butte. We've got a couple articles, like the Board of Trade. It was big headlines, you know, the world famous Venus de Milo statue will be on display this week at the Board of Trade. And they took it to the Chicago World's Fair, I think in 1932 or 36 World Fair. They had a little case to put in, but anyway, we're probably going to put it on loan at the Mineral Museum at Montana Tech, but it's just something that my family's always had in their history. And it's in a bank and a safety deposit box here in Butte, but I think it should be on display up at the Mineral Museum. So my family's continually mined the Highland District for over 100 years. I'm unsure of my family's production records, as you know, all I know is there was 3 generations of 14 children raised in the Highlands with gold and timber from the Highlands, so if that means anything. But estimates range from $1 million to $15 million worth of gold was removed by the turn of the century. An additional $1.3 million was removed by 1963. Again, most of the gold production was never reported except for the Highland Mine, which was in production from 1932 to 1942 when it closed for the war effort, or the War Production Limitation Order as it was called. The mine reported 63,000 ounces of gold with an average price of 35 bucks. So, that'd be pretty substantial right now. So in 1989, the Montana Centennial Nugget was found. So it was the largest nugget in 80 years. And it's 27.5 troy ounces. That's my dad, Howard Stratton, with some more nuggets in the pan there. So my brother, Mark Stratton, actually found the nugget. My dad knew where Johnny Kern found that 60-ounce nugget. My brother took it and went up and handed it to my dad. My dad's response was, "Looks good, keep digging." he wanted them bigger nuggets. But this picture's kind of fascinating when you look at the nugget and in its raw form. But what's also fascinating is here's the hand of a, he spent his life up there.